Before this story continues, please allow me to be clear about one thing. The story you are about to hear is a fictional narrative created for entertainment and educational purposes, to reflect toxic family dynamics and the inner journey of a woman who endured silence for too long. All characters' events and situations are entirely fictional and do not represent real people or real cases. The content may be supported by AI tools during creation and production. This story does not promote violence, hatred, or harm in any form. It is told to invite empathy, reflection, and personal growth, especially for women who have sacrificed, remained patient, and been hurt within their own families. The entire narrative is built to be advertiser-friendly and aligned with YouTube community guidelines without targeting or implying any real individual. If you see a part of your own life in this story, stay until the end. And if your heart is touched, share your thoughts in the comments or follow the channel to continue with stories for women who have carried quiet burdens and still deserve to be seen. My name is Jude Carter, and I was 27 years old in September of 2024, standing inside a lakeside event hall in Cleveland, Ohio, where the windows looked out over gray water and early fall light, and everything about the wedding felt carefully balanced between elegant and practical. The flowers were real but simple, the tables were dressed but not flashy, and the guests were the kind of people who smiled politely and checked their phones between conversations. I worked in operations and compliance, the kind of job people forget exists until something goes wrong, and in my family I was known as the easy one. My sister Erin was 30. The golden child, the one everyone worried about, celebrated and protected, while I was the one who could handle things on my own. Our mother Linda spoke softly with a smile that cut sharper than most raised voices, and our father Frank rarely spoke at all, preferring silence that somehow always landed on Erin's side. When the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and asked the family of the bride to stand, I felt my legs move before my mind caught up. My parents rose. Erin stood tall in her dress, and without thinking I stood too, because for a second I believed I belonged in that moment. Then my mother reached back, placed her hand on my wrist, and gently pulled me back into my chair while smiling at the table beside us and saying, "Not her, she is basically invisible." The word landed in the room like a label already printed and waiting. A few guests laughed, the polite kind of laugh that asks permission. Someone looked away. Someone else pretended to check their phone, and the music filled the space where my name should have been. I heard invisible as if it had been stuck to my dress for everyone to read, and I did not move because my body had decided to freeze. That was the moment everything inside me went quiet. I did not cry or argue or leave. I sat there and watched my parents beam while Erin accepted applause, and I realized how easily the word had come out of my mother's mouth. It was not anger or heat, it was comfort. It was a joke she had practiced without knowing she was practicing. That is the thing about being invisible. People stop guarding what they hand you. They assume you are harmless. They assume you will take care of things quietly like you always have. They assume you do not count. As the applause faded and the music swelled again, I felt something shift from hurt into clarity. I was not offended anymore. I was confirmed. The venue smelled like lake water and wine and warm food, and as servers moved between tables, I stayed seated and listened to the clink of ice in glasses and the low hum of conversation while my sister was toasted as the daughter who made everyone proud. I noticed how no one said my name and how that absence felt intentional rather than accidental. I noticed how my father avoided my eyes, and how my mother leaned forward to accept compliments meant for the family as a whole. I noticed everything because when you are invisible, you become very good at watching. The night went on with a buffet line that wrapped around the room, an open bar where people joked about the drive home, and a dance floor that filled quickly. During the father-daughter dance, my father held Erin close and smiled in a way I had not seen since she was a child, and when someone asked who I was, my mother laughed softly and repeated it again, invisible as if it were a personality trait instead of a dismissal. I did not correct her. I did not defend myself. I watched Aaron open envelopes and thank people for their generosity, while I helped clear plates without being asked because habits are hard to break. I felt the familiar role settle onto my shoulders, the helper, the organizer, the one who keeps things moving while others enjoy the moment. And in that quiet, I made a promise to myself that I would not make a scene. But I would also not make it easy anymore. If you have ever been erased in your own family, stay to the end, because sometimes the moment that breaks you is also the moment that finally hands you something you did not know you were holding. Lifetime of invisibility begins where that quiet settled into my chest and stayed there, because the truth was, this did not start at the wedding. It had been rehearsed for years in small, ordinary moments that looked harmless on the surface and learned me into the shape my family expected. The first time I understood my place was when Erin turned 16 and my parents surprised her with a used sedan parked crooked in the driveway, with a bow taped to the hood. It was not new and it was not fancy, but it was hers. And everyone stood around smiling while my mother took pictures and my father talked about responsibility and freedom. I remember standing on the porch holding my backpack because I had just gotten home from school, and when my mother noticed me, she said, "We will get you something too someday." And I said, "I am fine, I can take the bus." I meant it, and they took me at my word. Erin drove herself to practice and work and friends' houses, and I learned the bus schedule by heart and walked the last blocks when it rained. It felt grown up at the time, like proof I was capable, but what it really taught them was that I would not ask, and so they would not offer. The second scene that plays on a loop is the family photo from that same year, the one my mother still keeps framed in the hallway. Erin is in the center, smiling with her hair brushed just right, and my parents angled toward her like a natural frame. I am there too, but off to the side, half turned because my mother told me to move a little. "You are blocking the sign behind us." I stepped where she pointed and the camera clicked, and no one checked if I was still in the shot. When the prints came back, Erin picked her favorite, and that became the one on the wall. I did not complain because it seemed silly to argue about a picture, and because by then I had learned the cost of asking for space. The third scene happened so often it blurred into routine. Whenever something official arrived in the mail, or a form needed filling out, my phone would buzz and my mother would say, "Can you handle this? You are good with paperwork." I would sit at the kitchen table and read carefully and explain things in plain language and highlight where to sign, and no one asked if I had plans or if I was tired. It was understood that I would make time because I always had. Somewhere along the way, I became the family's solution without being part of the family's story. I was the kid they never worried about. Turns out that was the problem. As we got older, the pattern hardened. When Erin applied for college, I helped her organize deadlines and proofread essays. And when she needed a resume, I fixed the formatting and softened the verbs. And when she had her first baby, I watched him for hours so she could rest. I did it because I loved her, and because it felt easier than explaining why I mattered too. No one kept score except me, and even I pretended not to. My parents praised Erin for every milestone, and praised me for being helpful, which sounds kind, until you realize one celebrates a person and the other celebrates utility. I learned to read rooms, to anticipate needs, to smooth things over before anyone noticed friction. At holidays, I arrived early to help and left late after dishes were done. And when relatives asked what I was up to, my mother would answer for me saying she keeps busy. Busy with what was never specified. I started to understand that visibility was not about effort, it was about expectation. Erin was expected to shine, so she did, and I was expected to manage, so I did. When something went wrong, the calls came faster and the tone sharpened, and when something went right, I was not mentioned at all. It did not feel cruel, it felt efficient, like a system that worked as long as I did not question it. I told myself this was just how families were, and that not everyone needed applause. But the cost showed up in small aches, like the way my stomach tightened when my phone rang, or how I hesitated before sharing good news because I did not want to make anyone uncomfortable. I began to understand that being easy meant being available, and being available meant being invisible. The unfairness escalated quietly. I handled insurance claims and school forms and schedules while Erin handled celebrations. I corrected mistakes that were not mine, and absorbed stress that did not belong to me. When I tried to step back, my mother would laugh and say, "Do not be sensitive, we need you." That word need landed heavier than love. By the time of the wedding, I had already trained myself not to expect acknowledgement, and that is why the word invisible did not shock me so much as confirm what had been true all along. If this sounds familiar, tell me you were the easy one without telling me. The value here is not the memory itself, but what it reveals: a kind of favoritism that does not shout but still shapes everything, and a role that turns a person into a tool while everyone insists it is kindness. The wedding humiliation levels up continued from that quiet realization, because once the room had decided who mattered, it kept proving it in ways that felt ordinary enough to excuse. When I finally stood to look for my seat, I found my name on a small card tucked near the back of the hall, close to the swinging doors that led to the kitchen where staff moved in and out carrying trays. It was not hidden exactly, but it was clearly an afterthought, a place where no one important would be inconvenienced by my presence. I sat down and watched as Aaron was guided to the head table with Mason and my parents and the wedding party, while people stopped to congratulate them and pose for photos. From where I was seated, I could see the buffet line forming and hear the clatter of dishes being set down and smell warm food drifting from behind the doors. It was the kind of seat you give to someone who might need to slip out early. When the music started and the open bar filled with people ordering drinks, I stayed where I was because standing would have meant crossing the room alone, and I did not want to be noticed for the wrong reason. The first escalation came quietly, when I realized no one from my family came by to check on me or even acknowledge where I was sitting. They were busy greeting guests, laughing and accepting compliments, and I was busy folding my napkin and pretending to read the program. The second escalation came during the toast, when my father stood and tapped his glass and thanked everyone for coming, and spoke about Erin as the daughter who made us proud, the one who always knew what she wanted, and went after it. He talked about sacrifice and joy and family values, and my mother nodded beside him, smiling at the room. He did not mention me once, not even in passing, not even as part of the family he was thanking. People clapped, and Erin dabbed at her eyes, and I clapped too, because stopping would have drawn attention. The third escalation landed harder because it was personal and public. I stood in line at the buffet holding a plate when an older guest turned to me and asked kindly, "Who are you related to?" And before I could answer, my mother appeared beside us and laughed softly and said, "Oh, she is just invisible." She said it like a joke, like a shortcut, like something everyone would understand. The guest smiled awkwardly and said, "Oh," and turned back to the food. My mother moved on, already distracted by someone else. I felt the word settle again this time, not as a shock, but as a role being reinforced. I carried my plate back to my table and noticed how Erin was receiving envelopes and hugs and praise, while I was asked by a server if I could pass a message to the kitchen because they thought I worked there. I did not correct them. I watched the father-daughter dance from my seat and saw how my father held Erin close and whispered something that made her laugh, and how my mother wiped her eyes as if the moment belonged to all of us when it clearly did not. The DJ announced the next song, and people flooded the dance floor, and I stayed seated because there was nowhere I felt invited. I noticed how easy it was for them to forget me, and how easy it was for others to follow their lead. That was when the thought settled fully and slowly, and without drama. It was not the word. It was the ease they said it with. The way it required no explanation and no apology. The way it fit so neatly into the night. I did not feel angry yet. I felt something colder and steadier, like a door closing. I realized I had spent years trying to be seen by people who benefited from not seeing me. As the night went on, I helped stack chairs when staff fell behind, and I pointed guests toward the restrooms, and I held doors without being asked, because habits do not disappear just because you finally notice them. Erin danced and laughed and opened gifts, and my parents stayed close to her, basking in the attention, and when someone asked where I had gone, no one noticed I had never been anywhere to begin with. I sat back down and watched the room move without me, and I understood that this was the last time I would beg silently for recognition that was never coming. Do not click away. This is the part where I stopped begging to be seen. The value here is not the insult itself, but the accumulation, the way each small dismissal built toward something undeniable, and the way being treated like a background detail in your own family can finally force you to choose yourself. Jude's secret power started the next morning when the music was gone and the wedding lights were just a memory, and I woke up in my apartment with the kind of calm that comes after you finally stop negotiating with reality. I went to work like I always did because routine was the one place my life still felt honest. I worked at Lakeview Credit Union in operations and compliance, and if that sounds invisible, it is because it is meant to be. I was the person who made sure accounts were opened correctly, that forms were complete, that signatures matched, that deadlines were met, and that everything in our system could stand up to scrutiny if anyone ever asked questions later. People imagine power as a loud office and a title on a door, but the kind of power I understood lived in processes and records. It lived in dates and names and what was filed and when. My job trained me to be careful in ways my family never noticed because they assumed I was just organized by nature. I had habits that were not dramatic and not secretive. I saved emails in folders. I scanned documents the same day they came in. I wrote down the date and time and the name of the person who said something important. Not because I planned to use it against anyone, but because that was what professionalism looked like in my world. If something ever went wrong, the question was never who feels innocent, it was what can be proven. For years, those habits were just how I kept my work clean. Then after the wedding, they became something else without me changing a single thing. The escalation started with a text from my mother 2 days later as if nothing had happened. "Can you come by this week? We need your help with some paperwork." No apology, no mention of invisible, just need. I went because I had not yet learned how to say no without guilt, and because part of me wanted to see if they would act like that night mattered. They did not. My parents' kitchen smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner, and my mother slid a stack of envelopes toward me like she was passing me a grocery list. House stuff, she said. Taxes, insurance, and the refinance paperwork your dad keeps forgetting. You are good at these things. My father sat at the table staring at a pen like it was foreign. Aaron was not there. Aaron never had to be there for the boring parts. I opened the first envelope and started sorting while my mother watched me with a satisfied expression as if my usefulness confirmed her story about me. When I asked a simple question about dates, my mother sighed dramatically and said, "You are good for something at least." She smiled when she said it as if it was affectionate. I did not react. I noted the sentence the way I noted everything now, not for revenge, but for clarity. Over the next week, the requests increased. A call from my father asking me to explain a letter from the county. A voicemail from my mother asking me to print forms and bring them over. A quick message asking if I could fill out a change of address online because the website was confusing. Each time I did what I always did. I asked for the original documents. I checked names. I highlighted where to sign. I wrote dates in the margin. The escalation turned sharper when my mother added one more folder and said, "This is just for convenience." It was a power of attorney form. She said it casually, like it was a permission slip. "In case something happens and we need you to handle things," she said. "It is easier if you can talk to people on our behalf without them giving you a hard time." My father nodded. "Aaron is busy with married life," my mother added as if that explained everything. I read the form carefully. I knew what a power of attorney meant. It meant authority. It meant legal responsibility. It meant that if I signed things without understanding them, I could create problems for myself and for them. I did not argue. I asked for time. I said I would review it and make sure it was done properly. That was not me being dramatic. That was me being trained. My mother rolled her eyes and said, "Of course you will. You always do." I took the documents home and scanned them and saved them in a folder like I did at work. I saved screenshots of every email and text related to them. I wrote down the date and time and who asked me. Again, not as a plot, as a habit. A week later, my phone rang at my desk at Lakeview, and when I answered, a woman introduced herself as Tanya Ruiz, an escrow officer working with attorney Miles Benton. She did not call me Jude like my family did. She said Ms. Carter, and her tone was crisp and professional. "I need to confirm a few details on a file connected to your parents' property," she said. I could feel the line between my two worlds sharpen. I asked for the file number. I asked which documents she had on record. Tanya answered quickly because she was used to speaking with people who understood. When I replied, I used the same precise language I used at work. "Please email the request to my secure address," I said. "I will confirm once I review the recorded information." There was a brief pause, and then Tanya said, "Thank you, Ms. Carter. I appreciate the clarity." In that moment, I realized something my family had never bothered to see. I was not just the helper at the kitchen table. I was the person who understood how these systems worked, and that understanding had weight. It was not glamorous, but it was real. And I had my own quiet stability, too. A savings cushion I had built slowly. A credit score I guarded like a secret. A habit of paying on time and keeping receipts and staying ready for emergencies because no one else was going to save me if things fell apart. I had control in my own life, even if my family treated me like a background detail in theirs. When I hung up the phone, I looked at the folder on my computer with my parents' scanned documents and the timeline I had built without meaning to, and I felt the shift again from hurt into leverage. If you are still here, you already know being overlooked can be leverage. The value in this part is simple and dangerous at the same time. While my family was busy making jokes about my invisibility, they had placed real authority within my reach, and they did it because they assumed I would never realize what I was holding. Public exposure moment unfolded on a gray Tuesday morning downtown when my parents decided it was time to close quickly and move on as if speed could erase risk. They called me twice before 9, urging me to meet them at the attorney office because everyone was busy and this needed to be handled today. My mother spoke in that cheerful, urgent tone she used when she wanted compliance, not discussion. And my father added that the realtor was waiting and rates could change. Aaron texted that Mason had taken time off work, so please do not slow this down. No one asked if I was available. No one asked if I was comfortable. They assumed I would show up because I always had. The office of Miles Benton sat above a coffee shop on a busy street with glass walls and muted artwork meant to signal professionalism without personality. The conference room smelled faintly of paper and sanitizer, and a long table stretched between us like a border. Tanya Ruiz sat at one end with her laptop open and a neat stack of folders beside her. The realtor leaned back scrolling through her phone. Aaron and Mason sat close together whispering while my parents took the seats nearest the attorney, as if proximity still meant authority. I sat where there was space, and placed my bag at my feet and folded my hands the way I did at work. The escalation before the peak happened in small, dismissive gestures. My mother slid documents toward me and said, "Just sign where we marked it will be easier." My father said, "We already went over this last week, do not overthink it." Aaron laughed and said, "You are always so careful." Jude, relax. The pressure was not loud, but it was layered and familiar and designed to hurry me past the moment where questions lived. Miles Benton entered with a calm nod and opened the file. He thanked everyone for coming and explained the process in a voice that suggested this was routine. As he spoke, I watched my parents lean forward, eager to be done, and I noticed how they did not look at me at all. When it came time to confirm authority, Miles looked up and asked a simple question that changed the room. "Who is the authorized signer listed on file, including any power of attorney or related authority?" Tanya did not hesitate. She scrolled once and then spoke clearly. "Jude Carter." The room went silent in the way silence does when no one prepared for it. Aaron stopped whispering. The realtor looked up. My father blinked. My mother laughed a little too quickly and said there must be some mistake. Tanya shook her head calmly and replied, "No, Mom, it is on the recorded documents," and she turned the screen slightly so the attorney could see. Miles leaned in and nodded and said that matches what I have. The shift from fast to slow happened inside me as I watched their faces change. The confidence drained, first replaced by confusion, and then by something I had never seen directed at me before: fear. My mother opened her mouth and closed it again. My father stared at the table. Aaron looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, and Mason straightened in his chair. No one raised their voice. No one accused anyone. The exposure lived entirely in that pause and the paper trail behind it. I felt steady, not triumphant, not angry, just grounded in fact. Miles asked if there were any objections, and my mother tried again, saying we did not realize that was the case. Tanya replied evenly it was signed and recorded. Miles turned to me and asked if I was prepared to proceed. I met his eyes and said, I am, but I want to be clear about what I am signing. My mother exhaled sharply. Aaron shifted. The room waited. I did not claim ownership. I did not threaten. I did not grandstand. I said one sentence and let it land. I am not invisible on paper. That was it. That was all. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before, because this time everyone understood the implication. They had assumed my quiet meant absence. They had assumed my help meant submission. They had assumed the joke would stay a joke. The attorney nodded and continued with the process, slower now, more deliberate. Questions were asked, clarifications were made, documents were reviewed. My parents answered when spoken to but no longer rushed. Aaron watched my pen when I signed where appropriate and waited when I paused. The power in the room did not shift because I took something. It shifted because everyone realized I already had it and always had. This is where they realized the joke was not funny anymore. The value of this moment was not humiliation for its own sake, but the undeniable proof that respect follows record and preparation more than volume or entitlement. Consequences. The price of disrespect did not arrive as a single blow, but as a series of costs that accumulated once the room stopped pretending everything was fine. After the closing meeting, the tone changed immediately. My mother called first with a careful apology that was not really an apology, asking if we could just get past the confusion and finish what we started. She framed it as unity and urgency, saying the bank window would not wait, and the realtor was getting nervous. I listened and told her to put everything in writing. She sighed and said, "You know, we do not need to be so formal." The next call came from my father, whose voice was tight as he said, "We have always counted on you, and this is not the time to make things difficult." I repeated the same answer. "Email is fine." Aaron texted next, asking if we could talk woman to woman because Mason was concerned about how this looked, and she did not want stress to spill into their new marriage. The escalation followed a predictable path. First the pleading, then the pressure, then the attempt to make me feel responsible for everyone else. When the first rate lock expired, the consequences became tangible. The lender withdrew the preferred rate, and the monthly payment shifted upward enough to matter. The realtor sent a message outlining the risk to earnest money if timelines slipped again. My mother forwarded it to me with a note saying, "See what you have done." I replied once and only once, saying all steps would proceed according to documented process and deadlines, and asking that any requests be sent by email, so nothing was missed. The accusation phase arrived quickly after that. My parents said I was tearing the family apart over paperwork. Aaron said I was embarrassing her in front of Mason and his parents, who were now asking questions about delays. The words sharpened, but I did not engage. I kept my responses brief, factual, and calm. I asked for updated disclosures. I asked for confirmation of intent. I asked for clarity on authority. Each request slowed the momentum because momentum had always depended on me smoothing things over quietly. Without that lubrication, the machine squeaked. Another buyer appeared interested and then backed away when timelines wobbled. The realtor explained the market did not reward indecision. My parents blamed me again. They said I had changed and that I was cold and ungrateful. I read the emails and saved them and replied with questions instead of defenses. The pressure tried to turn personal. My mother wrote that, "After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us." My father wrote that families do not operate like businesses. Aaron wrote that Mason did not sign up for this kind of drama and asked me to think about what kind of sister I wanted to be. I noticed the pattern and how none of it addressed the documents or the process. It was all emotion and urgency meant to pull me back into the role that fixed things without recognition. The financial consequences kept stacking. A fee here, a missed opportunity there. The earnest money sat at risk like a quiet timer everyone could hear. I did not gloat, I did not threaten, I did not rush. I required that every change be reviewed and that every instruction be confirmed. I insisted on email because email does not forget. In the quiet moments between messages, I noticed my own internal shift. I was not seeking revenge. I was seeking alignment. I was stopping my labor from being extracted under the cover of family. That realization brought an unexpected peace. Justice was not making them suffer. Justice was refusing to be used. When my mother called again and raised her voice saying, "You are ruining us," I waited until she finished and said, "Please put that request in writing." She hung up. When Aaron tried again with a softer message about family dinners and starting fresh, I replied that we could talk later after the process concluded. The days stretched, the costs added up. The pressure intensified and then faltered as they realized volume did not move me anymore. I watched from a distance as their certainty eroded. The power they thought lived in proximity and tone had been replaced by a power that lived in procedure. The value of this part is not punishment, but exposure to consequence. When respect is withdrawn, systems respond, and when systems respond, emotion loses leverage. Audacity return arrived quietly the way entitlement often does, after it realizes pressure alone will not work. The call came early on a weekday morning while I was reviewing a routine compliance report at my desk, and the name on the screen was my mother. Her voice was softer than it had been in weeks, and she skipped any real greeting and went straight to urgency saying, "Your father had a scare, nothing serious, but enough that insurance paperwork needed to be filed correctly and quickly. She said, 'We need you, you are family.'" I let the silence stretch before answering, because I needed to hear the words the way she intended them to land. Then I asked one question and nothing else. Was I family at the wedding? There was a pause, and then a light laugh, the kind meant to smooth over friction. And she said, "Oh, you are sensitive, it was a joke." The escalation turned sharp in that moment because the apology became minimization, and minimization became expectation. She said the hospital was asking for forms and claims and authorizations, and that it would be easier if I just handled it like I always did. She said, "We do not have time for this now." I listened and felt the old reflex try to wake up and then settle back down. I told her I was sorry about Dad, and that I hoped he was feeling better. Then I said I could not take this on without a formal agreement and clear scope, and that I would not do it for free and without conditions. The silence on the other end was no longer gentle. She said, "Do you hear yourself? You are talking like a stranger." She said, "After everything we have done for you, this is how you respond." The shift from apology to demand was complete. I repeated myself calmly and offered an alternative. "Use the professional services. I can recommend someone." She said, "We do not need a stranger, we need you." I said I am not available in that way. She hung up. The next call came from Aaron, who sounded tight and irritated and said, "This is not the time to make a point, and Mason is stressed because costs are piling up and the house plans are slipping." She said, "Mom told me you are refusing to help, and that feels cruel." I told her the same thing I told Mom, that I was not doing unpaid, unlimited work under the banner of family, and that there were professionals who could handle it efficiently. Aaron accused me of punishing them and said, "Dad is sick, and you are choosing now to draw lines." I said I was choosing consistency. The escalation completed its arc when blame replaced request. My mother sent a long message later that day saying if anything went wrong it would be on me because I knew how to handle these things, and chose not to. I read it once, saved it, and did not reply. The practical consequences followed immediately and predictably. Without me managing the paperwork, they had to schedule appointments and pay fees and wait for callbacks. Forms were returned for corrections. Deadlines stretched. Aaron complained about added costs and delays that pushed back their moving timeline and changed contractor availability. The same people who had laughed at my invisibility now felt the absence of my labor as friction and expense. I did not celebrate it. I simply did not fix it. When my mother tried again with a different tone saying, "We can talk about what happened later, just please help now," I repeated the same offer. Use the professional services. I can recommend someone. It was not vindictive. It was final. In quieter moments, I examined my own feelings and found something steady where guilt used to live. I was not refusing care. I was refusing exploitation. I was not withholding love. I was withholding free labor that came with disrespect attached. The audacity was not that they asked for help. It was that they asked as if nothing had changed, and as if the word invisible had not been spoken out loud in a room full of witnesses. My father sent a brief message saying, "Your mother is upset, and we did not raise you to be like this." I replied once, saying I was available to communicate through email regarding any formal requests. The days passed, and the systems did what systems do when unassisted by a quiet fixer. They slowed, they charged, they required patience. Erin grew angrier as costs touched her plans, and she accused me of choosing principle over people. I thought about that and realized the opposite was true. I was choosing people, including myself, over a principle that said, my time did not matter. If someone only sees you when they need you, you already know what that is. The value of this moment was not the refusal itself, but the clarity it created. Boundaries exposed who was willing to meet me with respect and who only wanted the convenience I provided. Resolution peace. With dignity arrived not as a victory lap, but as a steady quiet that settled once the noise finally stopped demanding my attention. I did not announce boundaries with speeches or ultimatums. I set them the way I set everything else now in writing and in practice. I stopped being the paperwork girl. I did not manage forms, calls, timelines, or emergencies that were not mine. I did not attend gatherings where my presence was optional or conditional. When invitations came without my name, or with assumptions attached, I declined politely and without explanation. The relief surprised me at first because I had expected loneliness, but what I found instead was space. Space to eat dinner without checking my phone. Space to plan my own weekends. Space to be a person rather than a function. The family adjusted the way systems do when a piece is removed. They complained less to me because there was less to gain. Silence replaced pressure. And I learned that silence can be a kind of honesty. The small healing scene that mattered most happened on a Sunday evening at a diner near the lake where the windows fogged and the menu had not changed in years. Aunt Darlene slid into the booth across from me and ordered the same thing she always did and watched me with the kind of attention that does not rush. She had seen enough families repeat themselves to recognize a pattern, and she did not need details. When I told her I was done being invisible, she nodded as if that was the only sensible outcome. She stirred her coffee and said, "Honey, respect is not a favor, it is a minimum." The sentence landed because it named what I had been missing without blaming me for wanting it. We ate and talked about ordinary things, and for the first time in a long while I felt present rather than on call. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how my body responded to the absence of constant demand. My shoulders dropped. My sleep improved. I laughed more easily. When messages arrived that tried to pull me back into the old role, I responded with clarity and consistency or not at all. I did not justify myself. I did not relitigate the wedding. I did not ask to be understood. I accepted that some people only value what they can use and that understanding them does not require agreeing with them. I began to name what I would and would not do, and then I followed through. I would meet for coffee. I would share a meal if invited as myself. I would not manage crises I did not create. I would not sit at tables where I was erased. The peace came from repetition. Each small decision reinforced the last until the new shape held. When I thought about that night at the wedding, the word invisible no longer stung. It sounded outdated, like a label from a life I had outgrown. I did not disappear. I just stopped making it easy to ignore me. That distinction mattered because it placed agency where it belonged. The deeper reflection arrived slowly as I watched friends and coworkers navigate their own family patterns. Some families do not break you with cruelty, they break you with neglect. They teach you that being needed is safer than being seen, and that lesson can take decades to unlearn. I understood then why this story resonates with people who have lived long enough to recognize the cost. At 50, you do not want revenge. You want to be treated like you exist. You want your time to count, your presence to register, and your no to be accepted without punishment. I did not rebuild my family. I rebuilt myself. I chose dignity over access and consistency over approval. The consequences were real, but they were lighter than the weight I had been carrying. When my phone rings now, I answer because I want to, not because I am afraid of what will happen if I do not. That is the difference presence makes. If this hit home, leave a comment. Someone will feel less alone reading it.